Theresa for being with us today. Theresa is currently teaching business English and general English in Berlin, Germany, at various universities and companies. And she has been an EFL teacher for the past 10 years in different countries. She's currently working on a master's degree in professional development for language education at the Norwich Institute for Language Education. And together with her partner, Paul Walsh, she has just launched the Teacher Stories project, and that's definitely worth having a look at. She also tweets as Theresa_tech. We will probably give you all those details in the chat box later. She's going to talk about using integrated assessment for business English courses, and I'm really looking forward to her talk. So Theresa, the word is yours.
Thanks, Miki, and hello everyone. Thank you for attending, and it's nice to sort of meet everybody online. So, yeah, maybe we can get right into it. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And yeah, this presentation mostly deals with what I've done in a small university of applied sciences just outside Berlin, the University of Applied Sciences Wildau. And my students are studying business and law, and they aren't sure exactly what they want to do yet. They've chosen this program because it prepares them for a wide variety of different roles in companies, different types of companies. And my course is an introductory course. So the main aim of the course is to develop students' business correspondence skills. And just by way of overview, I'd like to talk about what integrated assessment is briefly, why I think it's a good fit for business English, and if we have time, some tips on designing and assessing these types of tasks. So, a very, very brief introduction about me. The work that I've done, the work behind this conference presentation was done for a course at Norwich Institute for Language Education, a really great course that I would recommend called Testing, Evaluation, and Assessment. And I did it for master's credit, but it's possible to do this course without master's credit. So just to promote that. Teacher Stories is a way to give teachers a creative outlet and to allow teachers to connect with each other, connect our lives. So if you're interested, feel free to get in touch. I'll give you my email address at the end. So anyway, what is integrated assessment? Mainly, we're talking about assessing two or more skills at the same time, or tasks which involve two or more skills. For example, listening and reading to write, listening to speak, things like that. So it's usually designed to assess productive skills, and it's based on a very holistic view of language ability as a whole, instead of dividing up language ability into different isolated skills. There are different definitions and different approaches to integrated assessment, which we can talk about if you like. Oh, by the way, if anyone has questions or important things to add, feel free to add things to the chat box, and we can try to be a bit spontaneous and develop topics where people have questions or more to say. So I'll keep an eye on the chat box. Okay, so integrated assessment, holistic view of language ability. And what these tasks do is they match more closely what people actually do with language in real life. And in that sense, they can be more authentic. They can be more powerful for predicting how well our students will perform in the workplace, for example. And not yet. And so up until now, the main focus with integrated assessment has been in English for academic purposes. So looking at students' abilities as they enter university, assessing how well they will survive university in English. And so there's been a lot of research around the TOEIC test of English for international communication, the TOEFL test of English as a foreign language, but not as much in business English, which I think is really interesting. There is the Trinity Integrated Skills exam, which involves reading and writing, listening and speaking. There's the LCCI, London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But the funny thing is I haven't found any research thanks. Any research involving integrated assessment for business English. So I think there are really compelling reasons to use it here, and I'd like to try to convince you, talk about what I found out. So in order to get a better idea, I was thinking I could ask you to look at two different writing exam tasks and compare them. But this will depend on having a PDF. And I wonder if we can possibly, yes, if you look at the files box in the upper left-hand corner, John, thank you, has put up a link to a PDF. And if it's possible for you to open that, I'd love to have you read two test tasks on the first page of the PDF. And I'd love to have you see what differences you find between the two tasks. We can take about 10 minutes for this. And I would love to have you put your ideas up in a virtual whiteboard. How will let's see. Shall I try to open the virtual whiteboard myself, or is it possible for you to do that, Mika or Ellen or John? So is everybody able to open the PDF? Great. Yes, the whiteboard would be great. Ah, lovely. Link's not working. Hopefully that can open for Judy. Sorry about that, Judy. But so those of you who are able to see the PDF, just whenever you're ready, feel free to type on the virtual whiteboard. Just whatever you think, whatever differences you see. Okay, so somebody said task 2 is more open, less specific instructions. Task 1, Margaret says, has more detailed parameters. Clearly British, yeah. The other is more neutral in setting. Yeah, feel free to, what you can do is, if you see the whiteboard in the middle of your screen, all you have to do is select the text, the big T, and then you can write your ideas right up on the whiteboard. So Mike says the second task forces the students to come up with lots of information themselves. Okay, maybe to sort of guide the discussion a bit, what do you think about the reading that goes along with these tasks? Oh, okay, thanks, John. Yeah, once we get done with this discussion about the tasks, then we'll go back to the slides. Thanks. Thanks, James. Okay, great ideas. So we've got a possibly more realistic task 1 with more detail, a bit more constraint, right? As somebody said, more narrow response. Testing reading skills too. And the 2 tasks are similar. Yeah. Similar to classroom tasks. Help students to write replies and respond to various prompts. Yeah. Task 1 gives prompts on content. Yep. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Okay. What about things like the tone of the language? You could use the tasks for discussion topic. Thanks, Brian. I'm not sure what you mean. Could you clarify a bit? What do you mean by for a discussion topic? Okay. We've got some ideas coming from Judy and from Brian. So yeah, keep the ideas coming. Maybe we'll come back to your ideas as they appear in the box. So to share, what I see here is that the second task, okay, I like the first task for discussion to introduce the form and use the second task for an assignment. Oh, I see. So use them together for teaching and maybe practicing or informal assessment instead of asking for discuss how they would respond to the task. Okay. Student can discuss the comparison to the tasks. Okay, yeah, as a way of testing or maybe even test preparation, I think is what I understand. for speaking practice. Good idea. Yeah. Okay, so there are ways to use each task in the classroom. And of course, yeah, it depends on the level. But if we think about them more in terms of formal assessment, formal exams, one thing I see in the second task is there's minimal reading and there's minimal context. So I have a role. I'm a regional sales manager, and I'm writing to somebody at head office. I don't know exactly who. But that's really minimal in terms of roles. I don't know the type of company. I don't know really the audience so much. You still need formal speaking testing. Yeah, I totally agree. But if we look just at testing writing, yeah, which is what these tasks are for. Yeah, definitely speaking. Unfortunately, I'm going to focus mostly on writing today. That's what I've been researching. But speaking is a wonderful, great area to think about. Um, but what I see is that in the first task, we have a very clear communicative aim. It's almost constrained, right? I've got to communicate I've got a very clear communicative goal, and it's very clear what effect I need to have on the reader and who the reader is. I know the reader has a very clear role. In fact, there are two readers. My boss or my supervisor will probably also read this correspondence. So very clear. It's trying to be very authentic. So the context gives me clues as to the socio-cultural relationships. So I've got to attend to that as the writer. The language itself is both formal and neutral. Oh, I see. I made a mistake. Task 1 actually has 1 or 2 more emails that I forgot to include in my handout. I apologize for that. But what you get after these two, after this email and letter, is you get a less formal, a more informal email from the boss saying, oh, I've been thinking, I'd like to make our files available to her. And he goes on and adding even more information for the writer to sort of integrate, to incorporate into the email that the writer has to write. So what I have to do is I've got to read and understand both formal and neutral language, different types of relationships between me and my boss, between my boss and Ms. Angela Foxton, Mrs. Angela Foxton, and I've got to deal with approximately 240 words of text. So it's integrating reading and writing skills. And what we get is intertextuality too. These texts are all related, and the text that I write has to be related. It has to refer back, and it has to continue this topical chain. It has to be integrated and intertextual with these other texts. So it focuses on language in use in a very specific context for a specific purpose. Whereas the second task has minimal reading. So the effort was not to assess reading, was to keep it as short as possible, to only assess writing in isolation. There's minimal context, minimal roles. There's no focus, there's no intertextuality. Other texts don't matter, I don't have to deal with that. So what I see in the second task is a very narrow focus on language functions and linguistic skill. So that's a really narrow. Other points that came up, the second one might be easier to grade, according to some people. I've just got a few functions: apologizing, explaining, informing, stating who will go to the meeting. It's pure writing assessment, whereas some people might think of the first task as dirty testing. I'm mixing up different things. So the first one comes from the LCCI. So this is an integrated business reading to write task. The second one comes from the Beck, Business English, Cambridge, Beck. I'm forgetting the heat. It's baking my brain. But anyway, so the question is, what kind of impact will each different task have on teaching and learning? And at this point, John, we can have back the slides. That would be great. Thanks. So the two tasks are really measuring different things, different constructs. So the question is what kind of impact will each of these tasks have on teaching and learning? Does anyone have anything quick to add to that at the end? Okay. Well, what I'd like to say is that the tasks are measuring different things. We've got discrete, narrow writing skill versus integrative reading and writing. I have to cope with the surrounding text. I have to attend to relationships. So for me, the construct behind the integrated task is workplace literacy. So the construct, in other words, the specific definition of language ability that provides the basis for the test task and provides the basis for interpreting scores is workplace. I would argue it's workplace literacy. So when I say workplace literacy, what springs to mind? Any immediate thoughts you'd like to add to the chat box? Jargon. Okay, definitely. Interpreting register, definitely. So it's more than just putting words on paper, right? Yep. Okay, we'll see what Sharon is saying. But workplace literacy, so this is an idea, appropriateness in workplace writing, clarity, conciseness. Business reader is busy, great. Those are really great points, and we'll come back to that. Thanks, Sharon. So this literacy, this workplace literacy idea, so this has been sort of adapted from English for academic purposes and literacy studies. So in a nutshell, researchers are now looking at academic writing in terms of participating in the academic conversation, right? Becoming a credible member of the academic community by participating in the textual world, reading and writing text. And if we transpose this to business English, this is exactly what our future business professionals need to be able to do. They need to be able to use their skills in concert to cope with all sorts of workplace communication, which is not always separated into listening by itself, then speaking by itself, reading a text in isolation, writing a text in isolation. So in the real world, when you're in the workplace, you have to integrate these skills. Now to use this construct to design a test, if my students are already working in the business world, that's very easy. I just look at what do they have to do, and then I find ways to adapt workplace tasks to make them appropriate as test tasks. But since my students, and maybe yours too, I don't know, my students are what we call pre-service. They're not yet working in the field. it's a bit harder to figure out, well, what is this workplace literacy that they have to develop? Where are they going to work? I don't know. But what I can do is I can turn to groundbreaking research in business communication to find out more about what workplace literacy actually involves, what it looks like. So I'd like to show you these two researchers um, found two prominent features of business discourse that I think are very relevant to teaching and testing. And they also point to the use of integrated assessment. So Leena Luhjala-Salminen, I might be mispronouncing her Finnish name, she studies English using professionals in Northern European multinational corporations. Stephen Evans has studied English using professionals in Hong Kong. And what they found is very interesting. They both found that one of the key features of business discourse is intertextuality. So we create our texts from the sea of former texts that surround us. Very poetic. Bazerman said this. So in the 400 plus emails, real business emails that Evans studied, there were thematic relationships, emails referring back, referring ahead, referring to reports, same topics. There were genre relationships between all these documents. So existing reports may be used as models for new reports. Emails always refer to other documents. Luhjala-Salminen also found this. So if you want to be literate in the workplace, you have to be adept at navigating these textual relationships, not just at composing the isolated email or letter. The next feature was the interlinking of spoken and written discourse. So they're often used simultaneously. Luhjala-Salminen had a fascinating study where she followed around a manager for a day and took extensive notes on all of his quote-unquote discourse activities, all of his communicative activities. And what she found was that there was hardly a single phone call, hardly a single face-to-face conversation that was not intimately tied up with a written document like an email, often an email or a report. So if you want to be literate in the workplace, you have to be competent at coping with written and spoken discourse, either simultaneously or in rapid sequence. So those were two things. There were other things, but just to put it in a nutshell. And the PDF, you don't have to look at it now, but if you're interested in finding out more about any of these things, I put a sort of an annotated further reading where all the references to my research behind this, or at least the interesting ones. So you'll find those Evans and Luhjala-Salminen journal articles. Anyway, so what they found, and I'm sure we all know that, we probably feel this intuitively, right? Email has become very pervasive. And Evans has this great quote, it's the thread that binds communicative activities together now. It's replaced faxes. So it's worth really getting to know the dominant characteristics of business email if we'd like to use it in our teaching, in our testing. So I'd like to just sum that up. I've got about 15 minutes. Okay, so when we look at important email characteristics, we're thinking about things like internal emails, which are the vast majority, at least in Evans' research, were the vast majority of business emails. They occupied much more time than external emails. Internal emails, he found, were very, very simple, very straightforward, and very direct. Even internal emails to a person's superiors could be very, very direct. Send me the report, for example. And in Yeah, in external emails, we're representing the whole company when we write, so we attend a little bit more to style and they tend to be more formal. However, that said, Evans found that concerns about grammar often drop out in email. We get the point across, we might not use the right verb tense, but despite that, we get the message across. So this is interesting because it has implications for test task design. Um, this brings up the issue of, are all authentic tasks, are all authentic materials appropriate to be used as test tasks? And if not, how do we modify them? That's a different topic. But so, as somebody mentioned before, the three key words to email are clarity, brevity, and speed. So most emails in Evans' studies were 50 words or less. I think 39 words was the average. And most were written in 5 minutes or less, as little as 5 seconds for an internal email, as much as 10 minutes for an external email. But we get straight to the point. So this has really interesting implications for test design. We should be writing under time pressure, or definitely in the classroom. Okay, the functions that were used in emails. Oh no. Excuse me. The most typical functions by prevalence in Evans' study were informing, instructing, suggesting, reminding, and explaining. So, is all of this useful for task design? Lots of interesting issues, but what I'd like to do, since we have in the time left, I'd like to move on to some kind of general test design principles and some more specific principles and guidelines for integrated tasks. So what I'd like to ask you now is to, at some point, look again at the PDF, and on page on page 3 and 4, you'll find a test task, an integrated reading to write test task that I wrote as part of the testing, evaluation, and assessment course that I took and that I piloted, that I used with my students in a final exam. And I looked at I piloted it and looked at the statistics, etc. So I'd like to sort of illustrate some of the test design principles that I learned in the course of my studies, and some of them are illustrated in this test task. And I'm sure, I'm sure you might find ways for me to improve the test task too, and which I'd certainly be open to hearing. So if you could take a look at that, it's kind of long, but I'd like to move into some guidelines. First thing to do, I wish I knew more about your experience with test design, but anyway, hopefully I'm saying things that are useful to you. What I learned is the first thing to do is to look at test purpose. And for me, since I was designing an end of course exam, I needed to know how well have my students achieved the course objectives. So I went back to those course objectives, and it's the course objectives that form the construct for the test. And as I said, for my course, that was workplace literacy. And now I broke that construct down. It's too broad for every test task. So I broke it down into the smaller components of that construct. And often these corresponded with units of the syllabus. So how well can the students introduce themselves, network, using written and spoken media, apply for jobs. Can they make and respond to all sorts of inquiries? How well do they use their written and reading and writing skills to solve problems. Complaints are often used, but there are all sorts of problems that need to be solved. And how well can they report information in reports or in other types of text? So I looked at my test purpose. I looked at what kinds of constructs I had for the tasks. And one of my considerations was what sorts of task types do I include. Actually, before that, I wish I could add a bullet point, and that would be collaboration. So maybe the first principle of test design is that it should never be done by just one person. This raises issues. I work as a freelancer, so I'm only paid for my classroom hours, and the same with my colleagues. So it's difficult, but if I can get other colleagues to read my tests first, this goes a long way toward writing better tests. So collaboration, test design should never be done by just one person. If it's possible to pilot your tasks, that's a very rewarding experience. I actually was able to pilot the test task that you see in the PDF. I offered it as a free lesson to a private client. I contacted her, a businesswoman, said, would you like a free lesson? I've got a writing task and I can give you some very focused feedback on your writing. Will you meet me in a cafe? I'll buy you a coffee. And that was fantastic. Just that experience led me to, for example, give the test taker a name so that my students taking the test don't have to think about irrelevant things. What's my name in this task? It led me to rearranging the order of the emails that the students have to write. So I put them in reverse chronological order, feeling like this might be a bit more authentic. This might be a more authentic way to present the information. We look at what is most recent, and then we go further back for the background information. And other things. So piloting a task, great way to make sure you're doing it right. Now looking at the test tasks, if it's possible to consult what we call subject specialists, people actually working in business or a field as close to what our students plan to do, we can get better information about what kinds of tasks people actually do. I think what most of us do is we use our intuition, which is important. We're professionals. Intuition is valid. But it's also great to use real research as well, as much as we can. Texts. I won't get into the debate about authentic texts. I have to admit I wrote my own emails for my test tasks, so they're not based on any authentic materials. But what I did do is I checked the reading level. There are websites where you can input text and check the reading level of your text. And I made sure the reading level roughly matched the CEFR level of my students, maybe slightly easier. Writing instructions, just like with teaching, the instructions need to be crystal clear. We need to, for integrated tasks, we like to give the students as much context as possible. Who is the writer? Who's the reader? What is the purpose? And as you can see on my test task, I put the assessment criteria at the top and tried to describe it very briefly in very simple language so the students can understand what I'm looking for. But that should not start with the test itself. Testing and teaching should go hand in hand. So I decided my assessment criteria at the beginning of the course, and I tried to implant that, discuss it with students every time they did anything in the classroom so that they would understand what are they aiming for, what are they aiming to develop, and so that they understand why. At this point, we're getting towards the end, and I'd really like to open it up to your thoughts and your questions. There's a lot to say about rating scales, a topic which I'm really fascinated with at the moment. But we're almost at the end, so what do you think? Does anyone have any questions or comments on any aspect of the presentation, business English testing, any critiques, any disagreements? Well, just to briefly conclude, to briefly wrap up, and feel free to interrupt. Uh, yeah, we talked about different types of tasks and more importantly, the impact that each kind of task would have on teaching and learning. I think integrated tasks um, maybe have a better impact, have better washback because they start to instill the idea of literacy being part of the conversation. I think that students relate to more, at least my business students are very practical people and they can relate to, they're more motivated when they think that something is more authentic. So, yeah, we know that if multiple choice grammar questions are going to be on the test, then they become a very important focus. But if writing a business email is going to be on the test, then students are more likely to actually practice that, which is what I want them to do. So I've shown that I'm looking at the chat box, awaiting what people will say. But I've shown you that any single act of communication in a business setting is likely to involve all four skills, really, in an interwoven fashion. So it's clear that, for me, it's clear that classroom tasks and test tasks should reflect this. So by offering tasks that combine four skills, I think integrated assessment really is the best fit. Judy, we need to reflect on authenticity, makes useful for the student. Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Judy. Yeah, it was interesting when for me what he's touching on is that in some ways, integrated assessment it's sort of a trend. It's sort of a trend, and trends come and go. Adi, I think one of the challenges is that standards created and automated. Yeah, yeah, Adi, thanks. That's fascinating. Yeah, and there's actually maybe some of you maybe know or are involved in, there's some computer adaptive tests are now a very hot topic in testing, and there's some amazing research going on computerized grading of essays even. This is probably going to become a reality. But yeah, that's a really good point. But if we're doing classroom tests, actually, let me ask you, what do you do with your classroom tests? How do you test your students? I think we're out of time.
Okay. No, we're not. We're not out of time. Just continue with your last sentence.
Oh yeah, I was just curious about what you do, what the participants do. Do you design your own tests, and what kind of tests? And
Well, maybe I can answer. We do have our own tests, and we do make them with some colleagues, as you said. But we also use the LCCI tests, and I recognize the first one you showed there immediately because it's a very a format which is, yeah, I recognize that immediately. So we also use that at the very end for one of the last exams they do, and we adapt it slightly, but we have that kind of integrated test. And what we like especially about it is that, as you said, most of our students, well, all of them, are pre-work students, and so they get all the information there which they don't have to come up with themselves. So you don't test creativity in other areas than just the language. So even the students who don't know a lot about business life already and are not so creative as they cannot invent everything or yeah what's going on in a real company, they can still do the exams very well because they get a lot of context there, and they can concentrate on the tone, on the register, on the vocab, on the content of the letters and the emails, for instance. So I think the LCCI are great. The material is free, so you can perhaps not just use it as it is, but get inspired by it, as you said today.
oh, thanks. So do you? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Trinidad, I'm sorry. I meant to get that website for you. I thought someone might ask for it. I have it here somewhere. Maybe I can send it to you.
Well, we have
Ah, thank you, Adi. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, and I'll check too. Okay, I'm making myself a note.
all right. So if there are no more questions, anybody? Then, oh yeah, yeah, that's how you can get in touch with Theresa. Um, we need to bring it to a close. Yeah, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Theresa, for
Thank
your
you.
very nice presentation with lots of good ideas to think about. The PDF was also very nice to have a look at. I mean, the exercises that you did especially, that you made especially. So thank you very much. The presentation has been recorded, so people can always go back and look at the slides and all the references you gave us. Thank you.